สำหรับเนื้อหาในช่วงถัดไปก็น่าสนใจไม่แพ้กันเลยนะคะดิฉันเชื่อว่าหัวข้อนี้เนี่ยจะเป็นอีกหนึ่งหัวข้อที่จุดประกายความคิดให้กับทุกท่านไม่แพ้ช่วงเช้าเลยนะคะโดยในช่วงนี้นะคะเราจะพบกับคุณเอียนจูสอีกครั้งหนึ่งในหัวข้อ Literacy is not enough learning for the 21st century ทำไมในยุคนี้เนี่ยพูดอ่านออกเขียนได้มันถึงไม่พอแล้วสำหรับการเรียนรู้ในศตวรรษที่21นี้นะคะแล้วการเรียนรู้ในยุคนี้เนี่ยมันเป็นยังไงกันแน่นะคะสำหรับผู้ที่ให้ความกระจ่างในหัวข้อนี้ได้ดีที่สุดดิฉันคิดว่าคงเป็นสุภาพบุรุษที่อยู่บนเวทีนี้แล้ว Ian you look so ready for the next presentation are you ready
Are you ready for me now
Yes I am asking you that are you ready for the next session
All right Let's do something a little different to start. What we're going to do as a group is we're going to do an activity, if it goes there. Okay, wait a second. I have to get my remote control, which I didn't put in there. Okay, we'll just go here for the minute. Okay, we're going to do a little activity called the 9 dots. Wait a second. I've just got to find my little activity. Hang on a second here. You surprised me. Hang on here. Let me just see if I can find what I'm looking for here. There it is. Okay. Hang on. There it is. That's what you need. You need to have a remote control. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little activity called the 9 dots. Now, here's what it looks like. You'll see right here, there's a grid in a 9-dot pattern. So what I want you to do is, I want you to take out a piece of paper, and I want you to make that 9-dot grid. Now, if you don't have a piece of paper, just use a virtual one. You can use that one right there. So let's get everybody making this 9-dot pattern right here. Okay? Everybody ready? All right. Now here is your task. What I want you to do is I want you to start at any point on the grid, and I want you to connect all of the dots by drawing 4 straight lines. Here are the rules. You can't lift your pen, and you can't retrace. You can't go backwards. Now, is there anyone out here who has seen this before? Hands up. Okay? Now, if you've seen it before, that's great, okay? Because I want you to be able to do this in 4 dots. If you've done this in 4 dots, I want to see you do it in 3 dots, or 2 dots, or 1 dot. Now, start at any point, connect all of the dots by drawing 4 straight lines, don't lift your pen, don't retrace. You have 3 minutes to do that. Get to work. And if you want to work together, you can do that. It's quite all right. You don't have to do this by yourself. Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you. If you finish, put up your hand and let me know, okay? Don't see anybody finished yet. You have 1 minute. 1 minute. You have 30 seconds. No pressure, no pressure. "15 seconds, no pressure. All right, pens down, look up here. So I have a question for you. Was this hard or was this easy? I want to hear that again. Was this hard or was this easy? Okay, let's try and see what you can do this. Now, what happened to you was most of you start in a corner and you draw to the other side like that. Then what we do is we draw a line up there like that. How many of you did something like that? Okay? Now, this is the critical point. What do you do from here? And there's a problem. We all have a problem, and what it is it's a self-imposed limit. It's blinders. It's an assumption. And what happens is we're focused on the 9 dots. And because we're focused on the 9 dots, we don't see very many things we can do. We don't see many choices. So most of us will do this. And that's it. You can't accomplish the task. But here's the question. What would happen at that critical point if we focused on the possibilities, if we focused on the opportunities? What would happen if we didn't limit our thinking? What if we moved beyond the 9 dots? So instead of only seeing one direction like this, what if we could expand the possibilities? And maybe what we might do is we might continue just a little further up like that. And you see, once you've done that, the rest is simple. Now, some people ask me, how did I do that? And other people will say, he cheated. Okay? No, that wasn't the case. All it took was inside my brain making a tiny shift, going just a little bit further. And that's what we're here to do in this presentation. We're here to try and go a little bit further from my presentation this morning. What we want to do is we want to try and expand our thinking. We want to take the handcuffs off our creativity, and we want to reach for just a little bit more. And all it takes is a little shift in your thinking. Now, for those of you who had done this before, was anybody able to do it in 3 lines? Because you can do it in 3 lines. Do you want to see? Here's how you do it. You start way off the page like that, and then you come back on an angle, and voila, there you are. Did you see that? Now, was anybody able to do this in 1 line? Because you can do this in 1 line, you just need a great big line. You understand? All it takes is to step back and start looking at the possibilities. Yes? Now, over the course of the last 4 years, I've written 5 books. The first book I wrote was something called Living on the Future Edge, which was all about the future of education, all the trends that were happening, and what it was going to mean to teaching and learning and assessment. Then I wrote the book called Understanding the Digital Generation, which says not only has the world changed, but because the world has changed, children have changed. Then I wrote a third book called Literacy's Not Enough, which said the world has changed, children have changed, and so as a result of that, we have to change as teachers to meet the children where they are. Now, I think you can hear that I don't hold strong opinions about a lot of things, right? What I'm going to say to you in this presentation today is that in education today, we focus on literacy. We focus on reading and writing and arithmetic. And I'm going to say to you that even if we educate all of the students in Thailand to the standards of the traditional literacies, reading, writing, arithmetic, as we currently try to do in our schools, that our students are going to be literate by the standards of the 20th century. They're not going to be literate by the standards of the 21st century. And if we are going to prepare our students for the world that awaits them once they leave school, just like we did with the 9 dots, we have to move our thinking. We need to move our assumptions about teaching and learning and assessment beyond this primary focus on the traditional 20th century literacies, reading, writing, arithmetic, to a new and very different set of skills than the ones that we valued in the past. What we need to do is we need to move from literacy to fluencies. Fluencies, I'll explain in a minute, are process skills. They are thinking skills. And these thinking skills are absolutely essential if our students are going to be successful in the new working and learning culture of the 21st century. So, a really simple question to ask is, what's the difference between being literate and being fluent? Well, I want you to think for a second about language. And let's think about someone who is literate in the Thai language. So what they're going to have is, they're going to have a working knowledge of the language, but because they're not completely comfortable with it, they have to stop quite regularly and they have to translate their thoughts from English to Thai. They have to think about pronunciation. They have to think about grammar. They have to think about spelling. And as a result of that, they may be understood, but their speech is going to be slow. Now, compare somebody who is literate in the Thai language with someone who is fluent in the Thai language. And you see, they speak fluidly, they speak continuously, they don't have to stop about thinking about what they're going to, how the language is constructed or translating what they need to say next. They are fluent, they have reached a level of unconscious proficiency that allows them to use their skills in Thai without, first of all, translating it from English into Thai. So in other words, they don't think, they just speak. Let me give you another example. How many of you are right-handed? Hands up. How many of you are right-handed? Put your hand up if you're right-handed. Put up your left hand if you're left-handed. Now, in your dominant hand, whether it's right hand or left hand, imagine you have a pen. All right, you've got that pen in your hand. Now, write your name. Write it. Write your name. All right? Write it. Got it? Now, put the pen in your other hand and write your name with your other hand. Does it look the same? You see, you are fluent with your dominant hand. You are literate with your non-dominant hand. Yes? Okay, last one, last example. How many of you, when you were young, learned to ride a bicycle? Remember that? Okay, so you learned to ride a bicycle when you were 3 years old or 4 years old or 5 years old, yes? Now, how many of you, since that time, went away from riding a bicycle for a long period of time, like 5 years or 10 years or something like that, yes? Now, you get on a bicycle, and you haven't ridden that bicycle for 5 or 10 years. How long does it take you to become comfortable with that bicycle? And for most people, they would say it's a matter of minutes, yes? Because riding a bicycle is a fluency. It is an unconscious mental process. You don't think, you just do. And the goal in education must no longer be literacy. The goal in education needs to be fluency. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay, so here's the weird part. This is the year 2014 in my calendar. And even though we are already 14 years at least into the 21st century, we're still debating, we're still arguing over what 21st century learning looks like. Yes? So, here's the question. What is 21st century learning? What are the new basics for learning? Okay? What are the new basics that every single student needs to have? They need to learn above and beyond the traditional reading, writing, arithmetic. What are the critical skills that all kids need to be successful, not just successful in school, but also in life after school? What are the skills that we need to develop in our students today to prepare them for tomorrow? Well, I have traveled all over the world. I've been to more than 80 countries in my lifetime. And everywhere I go, I ask this question. And I ask this question to students, I ask it of parents, I ask it of teachers, I ask it of education leaders, I ask it of politicians. And the interesting thing is, no matter where I go on this planet, the answer I hear is almost always exactly the same. The very first thing that people tell me is that if kids are going to be prepared for the 21st century, they need to have problem-solving skills. That students need to be able to solve complex problems in real time. That's almost always the first answer I hear. The next one that I hear is creativity. That students need to be able to think divergently. They need to think creatively in both digital and non-digital environments. They need to be able to create novel and useful solutions to problems. The next thing they identify is what we call analytical thinking. The ability to be able to compare, contrast, evaluate, synthesize, apply, all independently without instruction or supervision. What we call, in the West, we call the higher end of something called Bloom's taxonomy of thinking. The next thing they always tell me is collaboration. That students need to be able to collaborate seamlessly, not just a bunch of kids sitting around a table, but we need to be able to communicate with people all the way around the planet. The next thing they identify is they need to be good communicators. They need to be able to communicate in all different forms of media. They need to be able to communicate as effectively with those media as we were taught to communicate when we were growing up with text and speech. And the last piece that always gets identified is what I call ethics, action, and accountability. This includes things like personal responsibility, risk-taking, resilience, having a global perspective, understanding other cultures, understanding other traditions, understanding other customs, other religions. Okay? All of these things that we would call a global digital citizen. Now, I'll tell you this, doesn't matter where I go, I get pretty much the same answer. So here's the question. There's the list right there. What do you think? See, I passionately believe that education is not just about the traditional literacies that continue to be the primary focus in schools today. I believe that education for the 21st century must also be about cultivating in all of our students, not just the kids who are already good at school, but all of our students, the new basics, the new basic skills that I've identified right here. My group calls these things the 21st century fluencies. The 21st century fluencies are mental processes that can be memorized, learned, practiced, repeated, and developed into what we call unconscious habits of mind. But you see, here's the thing. I think most people would agree that these skills are really important. And the question is, if they're really important, why aren't we already teaching them in our schools? Well, there's a reason why we don't teach them in our schools. A great writer by the name of Tom Peters says, what gets measured gets done, And conversely, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. So the question is, here in Thailand, in the year 2014, what's getting measured in your classrooms and your schools, and what isn't getting measured? And are there things that aren't being measured in your schools that are absolutely essential for every student, not just the academically blessed, but every single student, if they're going to survive in the new digital landscape, if they're going to survive in the culture of the 21st century? And the related question to that is this: if they don't get those skills from us, if they don't get those skills in our schools, if they don't get those skills in our classrooms, where are they going to get them? And I know you can give me all of the reasons. You can give me all of the reasons why we can't do this. I hear people say to me all the time, Ian, I absolutely want to ensure that my students develop these skills. They're really important. But you know what? I just don't have the time. I just have no choice. I have to make sure that my students are prepared to, anybody want to guess? To pass the test. I'm responsible for them succeeding. My job depends upon it. Look, I absolutely understand the pressure that educators are under these days, okay? So much pressure that we let one day and one test drive all of our instructional days leading up to those tests. And many educators tell me that they feel handcuffed, that they feel shackled, that they feel absolutely overwhelmed by the curriculum and the expectations that are placed upon them. They feel that they have no choice. But you see, you want to know how to change educational policy in Thailand? I can tell you the answer to that. Succeed. Because if you can succeed, no one can argue with your success. If you make the shift to the new learning models for the 21st century and your students succeed, policymakers and educators and parents are going to seek you out to find out what you're doing. But you can't get new results by doing the same things you've always done. That's the definition of insanity. And I know change is hard. And you see, success is even harder. Some people think that success is a straight line from there to there. But in fact, you know and I know it is a long and twisting process. And it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. It's really easy to just throw up your hands and give up. Because the process of change is messy and it doesn't happen overnight. So, here we go. How do we have it all? How do we get it all? How do we address both the short-term goals of preparing our students for the exams, as well as addressing the long-term goals of preparing our students for the life that they're going to live once they leave school? How do we address the need for students to learn both the traditional content and the new basics for the 21st century simultaneously? So, let's start by asking, what are the new basics of learning? What elements do we all need to include if we're going to address both the short term of the test and the long term of preparing kids for life? Okay? I believe we have to shift our instructional approach to a model that parallels what happens in the real world. I call what happens in the real world relevance. So the question is, what is relevance? Well, a writer by the name of Richard Saul Wurman said that learning can be seen as the acquisition of information. But before it can take place, there must be interest. Interest precedes learning. In order to acquire and remember new knowledge, it must stimulate your curiosity in some way. And Richard Wurman says that learning has two parts. That if we teach kids content with nothing else, it's not a fastener. It does not have a fastener. Only one side of learning is made up of the facts. Only one side of learning is made up of content. The other side of learning consists of stories and ideas and things that are of personal interest to the learner. And Wurman says that content that is presented to students without personal interest or relevance is like only having one half of a fastener. Without personal relevance and interest, the content just doesn't stick. So the very first big question we have to ask is, how do you make the content stick? How do you cultivate personal interest and relevance? Let me give you an example of what this looks like. You know, getting students interested in geography or history or environmental science or political issues, that can often be hard. It can be a great challenge. Why? Because many students just don't see the relevance of that information to their lives, so it's really hard to pique their interest. It's really hard to get them engaged. But what if you were talking about geography or history or environmental issues or political issues within the context of a movie like, say, Avatar? A movie that absolutely immediately grabs the student's attention. Now, let's take a minute to consider the multiple themes or issues that a movie like Avatar addresses. Culture clash, civilizations, colonialism, capitalism, war, geography, love, geology, astronomy, belief systems, technology, cloning, racism, environmentalism, eco-terrorism, science fiction, science fact, journeys of self-discovery. The point is this: the possible connections are endless. Now, here's my question. If we taught those ideas within the context of a movie like Avatar, would any of those topics be of interest to the students? What do you think? Yes or no? Okay? Would the topics be relevant to the students? Okay? And if the kids were taught this way, one activity in a lesson, one lesson in a unit, one unit a term, if the kids forgot the content, would anything else of significance remain behind that they could use again in the future? And the answer is those 21st century skills, what we call the headwear skills. Now, Nikki and I, my wife and I, went out online to the internet and we did a search for Avatar and grade 1 through 12 curriculum, and we found a mere 36.5 million hits. Now, let me give you another example. Let's talk about gaming. Nikki, could you just stand up for a minute so they know who you are, please? Just to embarrass you for a second. Come on. You can do it, Nikki. Stand up. Nikki, come on, Nikki. Stand up, please, okay? Nikki is addicted to Angry Birds. Okay? Now, how many of you have played Angry Birds? Hands up. How many have played Angry Birds? Okay? If you don't know what Angry Birds is a strategy video game in which players use a slingshot, and what they do is they launch angry birds at pigs that are stationed in or on various structures with the intent of destroying all the pigs on the playing field. Now, if you've played this game, you know that it is incredibly addictive, and it absolutely grabs the gamer's attention. Okay? So, let's do the same thing for Angry Birds. Let's identify the multiple themes and content areas that the game Angry Birds addresses. Well, we could talk about data collection. We could talk about probability. We could talk about graphing. We could talk about velocity. We could talk about projectile motion. We could talk about vectors. We can talk about parabolas, critical mass, mechanics, catapults, strategic planning, building design, feedback, shapes, Newton's law, trial and error, cause and effect, the scientific method, perseverance, goal setting, writing a handbook, etc. The list goes on and on. Now here's my question. If kids were taught this way, one activity in a lesson, one lesson in a unit, 1 unit a term, if they were taught this way 20% of the time, if the kids forgot the content, would anything else of significance remain behind that they could use again in the future? What? The headwear stuff, critical thinking, problem solving, decision making. So Nikki and I did a search on Google for Angry Birds and K-12 lesson plans, and we got a mere 6.7 million hits that you could use in the classroom. And it's not just Avatar, and it's not just Angry Birds, because there is an absolute treasure trove of interesting and relevant topics to work with. We're talking about hundreds of popular games. We're talking about movies. We're talking about cartoons. We're talking about books. We're talking about music, sports, world events, websites, community issues. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You want to know what get kids to stay in the classroom and pay attention? Anybody who knows anything about teaching knows the secret of success is not about compelling kids to be there. It's about compelling kids to want to be there. It's not about getting kids to learn. It's about getting them to want to learn. And you see, if you can interest them, if you can excite them, if you can engage them, if you can challenge them, if you can make the learning relevant to their lives, one activity in a lesson, one lesson in a unit, 1 unit a term, I absolutely guarantee you that their performance, that their test scores are going to improve. So, the first element of 21st century learning is interest and relevance. They are an absolutely core essential element of 21st century learning. The next element of the new basics for the 21st century is higher order thinking skills. And if you want to talk about higher order thinking skills, you have to refer to something called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy starts with remembering. Remembering is basic memorization of facts, often without knowing what those facts really mean. I mean, I know Einstein's formula is E equals mc squared, but just because I can say or memorize the formula doesn't mean that I can use it to answer a question. Okay? So, when we're focusing on the remembering level for students, we're asking students questions like this. Name 4 kinds of apples. List the health benefits of eating apples. These are just basic low-level questions that just simply involve recall of that information. The next level up Bloom's taxonomy is understanding. Understanding is comprehending those facts and what those facts really mean, what they represent. For example, I could ask students a question like, compare the health benefits of eating apples versus eating mangoes. You see, that question requires a little bit more than just simple repeating back facts. The next level of Bloom, as you move up, is applying, which is the ability to use this information to complete a task or solve a problem by applying knowledge or facts or techniques in different ways. So what I could do is, I could ask a question like this. I would set up a challenge like, construct and share a recipe for apple pie. To do this requires quite a bit more than just simple regurgitation of knowledge, of details. Now, those 3 right there, remembering, understanding, and applying, they are known as LOTS, or lower order thinking skills. And I talk all the time about the need for us not to develop lower order thinking skills, but for students to learn higher order thinking skills. Okay? My suspicion is in most schools in Thailand today, as around the world, our primary focus is almost exclusively on those first three lower order thinking skills. So, let's move from lots or lower order thinking skills to HOTS or higher order thinking skills. Because you see, teaching and learning in the new digital landscape, in this new digital world, focuses more of the time on HOTS. See, in this new digital landscape, people of all ages are adjusting to a world where facts are almost immediately accessible, and increasingly, judgment between competing facts becomes an essential skill. So the higher order thinking skills starts with analyzing, which involves breaking down information into its component parts in order to extract meaning from the facts that we've discovered. So I might ask a question like, identify 4 foods that are made with apples and analyze which one of them has the highest health benefits. You really have to dig down into the data in order to be able to pull the essential meaning from the data. Now, as we move up Bloom's taxonomy, the next level is evaluation, which involves making value judgments about the information we've encountered. So we ask a question like, do you feel that serving apple pie as an after-school snack for children is healthy? Explain why or why not. You see, when you're working at the evaluation level, you're not just simply repeating facts, you're not just simply throwing up facts. What you have to do is, you have to value, you have to compare, you have to contrast, you have to interpolate in order to be able to turn the data into knowledge and wisdom. Now, take a look at this so far. As you move up Bloom's taxonomy from lots, lower order thinking skills, to HOTS, to higher order thinking skills, okay, what you'll notice is that you're moving up a ladder, and you're also moving from left brain activities to right brain activities. You see, as you move up that ladder, as you get to the higher points, you still have to be able to do the things underneath, because the things underneath support the upper levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So we've got remembering at the lowest level, we've got understanding at the next level, we've got applying, we've got analyzing, we've got evaluating. The last one, it's the king, it's creation. The absolute pinnacle of Bloom's taxonomy. Creating is about generating new ideas, creating new products, identifying new processes, ways of thinking. It's about designing, it's about constructing, it's about planning, it's about producing, it's about inventing. So you ask a question like, identify an unhealthy recipe for apple pie and create a healthy recipe for apple pie by replacing your choice of ingredients. Justify the health benefits of using the ingredients you choose versus the original ones. Now, here's the point. If you want to cultivate a culture of higher order thinking skills, which is the absolute foundation of the new basics for the 21st century, it has to be our focus in the classroom at least part of the time. It's absolutely critical that higher order thinking skills has to be incorporated into student activities. Again, one activity in a lesson, one lesson in a unit, one unit a term. You're taking baby steps to get there. Why do we need higher order thinking skills? I'll tell you why. Because all around us are matters of local, regional, national, and international importance that require outside-the-box thinking. Whether you're talking about trying to get an out-of-control nuclear power plant at Fukushima from suffering from a core meltdown, or whether you're addressing the effects of floods, or whether you're talking about global warming or overpopulation or famine, whether you're talking about trying to save an endangered species or trying to reduce pollution in the atmosphere, whether you're talking about terrorism and militancy, whether you're talking about trying to bring peace to all nations, whichever way we turn, there is a desperate need for people who, under enormous pressure, can think outside the box so that they can innovate their way through these and other challenges. You understand that test scores do not go up in schools because we give students iPads or notebooks or laptops or cell phones. If we just stick a student in front of a screen for 8 hours a day and hope that this is going to improve their student performance, it won't. Because the real issues for your children, the children in Thailand today, the real issues of 21st century learning, they require headwear skills, not just software and hardware skills. Headwear is about developing the skills related to critical thinking and problem solving and analytical thinking and creativity and collaboration and global awareness. So, higher order thinking skills is the second component of the new basics for learning in the 21st century. This is where our focus has to be at least part of the time. So, the first piece is that it has to have a relevance and interest to the student. The second thing is it has to focus at least part of the time on higher order thinking skills. The third component of the new basics of the 21st century is what brings everything together. It is what's called real-world experiences. Learning from the context of a real-world experience absolutely connects everything together. Now, some of you might know that there is a man from the University of Melbourne in Australia by the name of Dr. John Hattie. And he has written an amazing new book. Here it is right here. It's called Visible Learning and the Science of How We Learn. I'll tell you this book represents the biggest ever collection of evidence-based research on what works in the classroom and what doesn't work in the classroom. And I'll tell you, this book is incredible. Hattie has done 1,000 meta-analyses of tens of thousands of studies that have involved tens of millions of students that show what's called the effect size of using different instructional strategies. What is an effect size? What his analysis identifies categorically is what works in the classroom and what doesn't work in the classroom to improve learning. The problem is that the data in this book is incredibly dense. It's not that readable. So my wife, Nikki, got to thinking and asked the question, how do you visually demonstrate Hattie's data that identifies what strategies work and what strategies don't work, and how do you incorporate the learning theories of others? And what Nikki did was, she pulled all of the common threads of the work of different writers and thinkers about education and created what she called the progression of thought and learning. Now, based on what Hattie's research tells us, we know that students only remember a very small part of what they hear from things like audio sources, things like music or the spoken word. His same research says that we retain more of visual inputs, things like reading text or seeing images. His research says we remember even more of information that is audio-visual in nature, where vision and hearing are combined together. This would include things like watching and listening to a television program, or watching a video, or watching a cartoon, or an animation, or a physical demonstration of something. Now, all three of these right here, audio-visual and audio-visual, are all relatively passive learning activities. These activities primarily involve the learner sitting there and receiving information in a passive manner. And you see, with passive activities, student engagement is really difficult to assess, because what might appear to be students being engaged might in fact be just them being entertained or edutained. This chart right here shows a summary of a recent study of student neural activity during different times of the day and day and night, okay? And if you look closely at this, you'll notice that the highest levels of neural brain activity are for students are things like social interaction, sleep, lab, and studying. And that there's more thinking involved in students doing chores and watching television than there is them sitting in a classroom passively listening to a lecture. Now, here's where things change dramatically when we move from passive to active learning. Active learning involves activities such as participating in learning. It could involve things like taking part in a discussion, taking part in a debate, taking part in a presentation. In all of these cases, it's really difficult not to be engaged because the simple act of participating requires the student to focus and to process what's being received in order to respond. But here we go. Here's where it hits the top of the mountain. Hattie's research shows us categorically that the most productive environment for retaining information is activities that are multisensory in nature. Multisensory activities involve listening and speaking as well as physically doing. These are what we call the real-world experiences or simulations of real-world experiences. And the research shows us categorically that students will retain far more when they are actively engaged in the learning process. Now, if you look at this, you'll know that the stages of learning happen on a continuum from lots or lower order thinking skills on the left at the bottom to HOTS or higher order thinking skills on the right at the bottom. And Bloom's taxonomy, there it is right there, aligns perfectly with the learning mashup. Now I'm going to say what I just said a couple of minutes ago because it is so obvious you might have missed it. The research tells us categorically that the best environments for learning involve a focus on higher order thinking skills and active learning in multisensory or real-world situations. Now let me give you an example of what I mean by real world. You know, I could talk about earthquakes. I could talk about what creates them. I could explain plate tectonics and use diagrams, or I could even use a 3D model. I could talk about a tsunami in terms of the attributes of horizontal and vertical displacement of water, or what we call amplitude and penetration. How high is the wave, and therefore how far inland does it reach? Or I could talk about the real world. I could talk about what happened in Phuket. I could talk about what happened in Japan more than 2 years ago when an earthquake of 8.9 triggered a massive, here it is right here, and we do mean massive tsunami off the east coast of Japan. And I could talk about what happens in the real world when the ocean rises higher than the land. It's like an overflowing bathtub that never stops. Understand, just like at Phuket, 20,000 people lost their lives that day. Some of them are dying right now on this screen as you watch this video. And that's only part of the tragedy. Because just like what happened with Phuket, more than 90,000 people were left homeless. 3 years later, many of them were still without homes. But here's the crazy part. We don't hear about Phuket and the tsunami anymore. We don't hear about Japan and the ongoing tragedy. You know why? Because it's not in the news anymore. And there's only occasional mention of that nuclear reactor at Fukushima that's still melting down. The radioactivity is seeping into the ocean and the atmosphere. And it's not just what's happening in Japan. We don't hear about the Phuket tsunami. We don't hear about the Malaysian flight MH370. We don't hear about that train wreck in Quebec. We don't hear about earthquakes in Christchurch. We don't hear about that cyclone in the Philippines. We don't hear about the hurricane in New Jersey. We don't hear about the mine disaster in Chile. We don't hear about the oil spill in New Mexico. And you know what happens? We forget. What if we didn't forget? You know, maybe we could even do something about it. You know, maybe we could get our students and ourselves to contribute in a meaningful way. Maybe you know what we could do? Maybe we could design some lessons in which we challenge our students to solve real-world problems by helping people in need somewhere else around the world. While at the same time, we teach them geography. We teach them the science curriculum. Maybe even we teach them a little bit of math. While at the same time, we help build their awareness of what it means to be a global digital citizen. Now here's my question. Please respond to this. If we did this 20% of the time, one activity in a lesson, one lesson in a unit, one unit a term, would the students be able to connect to the material? This means yes, this means no. Would they be able to connect? Help me. Would the learning be relevant and interesting to them? Would it involve higher order thinking skills? So here is the formula for 21st century learning. This is the formula for the new basics. Interest and relevance, plus a focus on higher order thinking skills at least part of the time, plus real world equals the new basics. See, in education, cultivating interest and relevance in students is often a struggle. But if we use real-world activities, the relevance is obvious. And there would be no need for the student to ask the question, where in the world am I going to use what I learn in the real world? Because in the 21st century and 21st century learning environments, students use higher-order thinking to create real-world products as solutions to relevant real-world problems. Now, often I get asked, so how do I find a connection to all the various subject areas? You know, social studies is quite easy, but what about math? Well, let's look at geometry. Let's suppose we wanted to learn something like this: solve real-world and mathematical problems involving area, surface area, and volume. Second thing you want to do is apply the formulas V equals LWH and V equals BH to find volumes of right rectangular prisms with fractoid edge lengths in the context of solving real-world problems and mathematical problems. Okay, so how do we teach that normally? Well, what we do is we demonstrate what a cubic inch is. Then what we do is we draw a wire frame around it. And then what we do is we label the sides. And then we teach them to multiply things together. And then what we do is, okay, we then put a whole bunch of other examples. And we do the very same thing again. And you see, when we do this, do you understand that the only thing we teach our students is how smart we are? It's unlikely they're ever even going to remember that because it has very little connection to their lives. So here's the question. How do you do it differently than that? What if instead we gave our students a real-world challenge? And so here is a task, one of many that I can show you, that I will set for my students. Okay, I own a graphic design firm, and we have a new client. This client is a local restaurant that makes the most amazing cereal that they want to start packaging and marketing. Now, obviously, this covers a lot more of the curriculum than just volume. It could be talking about chemistry, it could be talking about the life cycle of plants, we're talking about so many things, but just for the moment, let's just stick to math. Here's the real-world task I'm giving to my students. Our client has asked us to create mock-ups of a cereal package in 2 different shapes that each hold the same amount of cereal. The client would also like you to come up with a name for the product. And the client would also like you to design for the package that is going to profile and promote the features of the granola. And at the same time, they want you to develop a promotional campaign for marketing the granola. So here are some of the questions that the students, not the teacher, has to ask. the hardest working person in the classroom should never be the teacher. The hardest working person in the classroom should always be the students. So, what would the boxes look like? What would it look like on the outside? What would you put in terms of information? What would be the background information? What's the name going to be? What other information would you include? Now, I'll bet you're thinking to yourself, man, that's a lot of work. I haven't got the time to do that. So, we did it for you. We have developed literally hundreds and hundreds of examples of 21st century learning lessons and units that you can download from the web. And I know that even if I give this stuff to you, some of you are going to say, it's too hard because my rubber band keeps snapping back the way it did before. And you give me all those excuses again. So I want to tell you about a very interesting research study that was done a couple of years ago in the United States. It involved two groups of students, each of 1,000 students, who were studying social studies at the grade 8 level. The first group were taught the grade 8 social studies curriculum in the traditional way that most of us are very familiar with. The teacher stood at the front of the room and talked. The kids sat in rows. The teacher talked. The students listened, maybe. We used worksheets. We used drill and practice. We had traditional tests. The other group of 1,000 students were taught the very same content, but it was primarily taught through problem and process-based learning, using real-world experiences and activities, with individual and group activities, using a variety of different kinds of technologies, and a blend of student and teacher assessment. Okay, at the end of the year, both groups of students were tested and they were given the very same traditional exam that the kids were normally given. So here's the question. How did the students do? Which group do you think did better? Well, the answer to that question is neither. The scores were exactly the same. It didn't matter whether you were taught by traditional means or whether you were taught by alternative means, the results were the same, which would seem to indicate that this conference is a complete waste of time. But if you thought that, you'd be wrong. Because 1 year later, the very same students were given the very same test, and the students that were taught by the traditional means, where the teacher stood at the front and talked, they were only able to recall 15% of the content. And they saw social studies as a series of unrelated facts. The students who were taught by project and process-based learning, real-world tasks, they were able to recall more than 70% of the very same content, and more importantly, they were able to demonstrate a deep understanding of the integrated nature of the learning. In other words, they not only remembered the content, more importantly, they were able to remember the processes which they could then use again and again in the future. Which leads us to this right here. And you see our formula for cultivating the new basics for 21st century learning. What's that formula? That interest and relevance, plus higher order thinking skills, plus a focus on real-world experiences, that equals the new basics for the 21st century in learning. Or, as we learned long ago, tell me and I forget, show me and I remember. Does anybody know what the next one is? Involve me and I understand. I repeat, the very best environments for learning and retention of learning involve active learning in multisensory or real-world situations. More importantly, and this is the critical piece, once the kids forget the content, because they will, what's left behind are the new basics for learning. What are they? They are these things right here. Problem solving, creativity, thinking analytically, collaboration, communication, and ethics and accountability, or what we call the 21st century learning fluencies. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want everyone in this room to take everything out of their hands, and I want you to stand up, please. Out of your hands, stand up. Everybody, come on, everybody, get up, get up, get up. Well, I know it's hard. Get up. Get up. All right. Now, make sure you've got some room, and if you get dizzy, don't do this. Okay. Close your eyes. Close your eyes like this. Close them and keep them closed. Now, with your eyes closed, start turning clockwise on the spot. Start turning clockwise on the spot. Clockwise. Come on, turn, turn, turn. Everybody, turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Keep turning, keep your eyes closed. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Stop, keep your eyes closed. Point north. Point north. Now look around the room. We have a problem. Because everybody in this room is pointing in a different direction. Yes? Now, I should have told you that I have a compass here in my hand. And the people that are gifted in this room are pointing over there. So how many of you are gifted? Put your hand up if you're gifted. Point north. Everybody, on the count of 3, point north. 1, 2, 3, point north. Come on, point north. Point north. Everybody, point north. Okay. Close your eyes. Put your hand down. Close your eyes. Point north. Ha! 100%! All right. Put your hand down at your side. Keep your eyes closed. Now start turning counterclockwise on the spot. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Keep your eyes closed. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, turn, turn. Turn, 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 turn. Stop. Point north. Eyes open. Except for these people up here. Why is everybody pointing in the same direction? Sit down, I'll tell you why. There is a great philosopher in the United States by the name of Yogi Berra, who says, if you don't know where you're going to end up somewhere else. So why the second time did everybody except these 3 people over here, why did everybody point north? Here's why. You were aligned to my voice. You were aligned to the furniture, except for those 3 people over there, you were aligned to the people around you. The purpose of this presentation, point north for me, please. Point north. Everybody, point north. Come on. Point north. The purpose of this presentation is to align you so that we will all leave this conference going in the same direction. Yes? No? So, here's what I want you to do. We've got 6 minutes. I want you to turn to the people around you, and I want you to tell them, based on everything that you have done today at this event, 3 things that you know now that you didn't know before you came in here today, and why, as an educator, it's important you know them. 3 things you know now, and why they're important. You've got 3 minutes to talk about that. 3 things you know now. Stretch your thinking. Stretch your thinking. Stretch your thinking. You have 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. All right, and start to come back to me. Come on back up here. Now, we're going to take a break because I'm getting tired of you. You laughed. Oh, you laughed. All right. Now, I am going to stay around here for the rest of the event. And if you want to come and talk to me, if you have any questions, if you have anything you want, you absolutely come and talk to me, and you come and talk to my wife, Nikki. Now, if you want to contact me by email, there are business cards up here at the front, and you can take one. You're more than welcome to it, okay? And on that business card is my mailing address. And if you write me at the mailing address, which is on that card, I promise to get back to you within 1 year. But if you email me at this address right here, notice, Nikki, that it's the wrong one, okay? If you email me at this address right here, my promise is that I will get back to you within 24 hours. So, I want to thank you so much for being here. It is a real honor to be back in Thailand again. You are a great audience. Now go away and get something to drink. Thank you very much for putting up with me. Cheers.
Another round of applause to Mr. Ian Juice, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that you have got many fan clubs in Thailand now. And get ready for a huge amount of emails. ทุกท่านคะในช่วงนี้นะคะดิฉันคิดว่าประเด็นในการบรรยายหลังจากที่คุณเอียนนั้นได้บรรยายเสร็จสิ้นไปแล้วนะคะสิ่งหนึ่งที่เราต้องกลับมาตระหนักกันนั่นก็คือเรื่องของฮาร์ดแวร์มากกว่าฮาร์ดแวร์นั่นคือทักษะของคนที่เรานั้นจะต้องนำไปพัฒนาแล้วก็ปลูกฝังให้กับเยาวชนของเราให้มีทักษะอันนี้มากยิ่งขึ้นแล้วก็อย่างกว้างขวางด้วยนะคะ